Meanwhile, a group of American lawmakers have written to President Barack Obama. They're urging him to push for that arms embargo in South Sudan. CCTV's Ryntjes reports from Washington.
Now, this is the letter that's been signed by 13 different lawmakers here. They are mostly members of the president's own party, and they talk about how helicopters and heavy weaponry has been used in civilian areas, resulting in hundreds of deaths, including 2 UN peacekeepers. It says that President Salva Kiir and his key rival and former Vice President Riek Machar are failing in their fundamental responsibilities to preserve the lives of their citizens and ensure the survival of their nation. It says the absence of an arms embargo is costing lives every day amid what it calls dubious progress on implementing the peace agreement and government obstruction of the ceasefire monitors. The lawmakers tell President Obama to support an embargo to reduce the flow of arms and inhibit the ability of armed actors to threaten civilians, pointing out that as a new set of peacekeepers is authorized and brought into the country, their lives will also be under threat. The US drafted resolution that's just been approved by the Security Council has a section threatening an arms embargo if the government obstructs those troops or members of the UN mission. But Human Rights Watch tells me they don't think that trigger mechanism goes far enough to persuade South Sudanese leaders to change course. Ryntjes, CCTV, Washington.
So the government has rejected that resolution, but what about ordinary South Sudanese? For more on that, we're joined live on the line from Juba by CCTV's Patrick Oyet. Patrick, what are ordinary South Sudanese saying about the latest UN resolution?
Well, the ordinary South Sudanese are just as divided as the international community. We've been speaking to people who are still residing in the UN compound, that is with the protection of civilian sites in the United Nations mission compound here in South Sudan, and many of them say that they support the idea of deploying more UN troops, and they say that the blame being leveled on the United Nations, like the one that happened on the issue that happened in Malakal, that is the northern part of South Sudan where civilians lost their lives, those who are under UN protection. They say this is an isolated case. They say actually they owe their lives to UN because if UN was not in South Sudan, most of them would not be alive today. So they say, after all, UN came to South Sudan not to actually provide protection in their bases the way they are providing now. So if anything happens, they shouldn't be too hard. The government shouldn't be too hard on the UN. They should allow UN to come in. But outside the camp, many of the people we spoke to are actually standing with the position of the government that they do not need more troops to come to South Sudan. They say that if fighting were to break out in South Sudan today, UN would not protect those who are outside the protection of civilian sites. Those who are outside, they would not be protected unless they get to the protection of civilian sites. So they are saying that, and the issue of deployment of the UN peacekeepers is not going to help stop the fighting. It's not going to guarantee that there is going to be no more fighting. They look at the issue here as a political solution has to be found to ensure that more fighting does not take place rather than deploying more UN troops. Another school of thought from those who spoke from outside say the UN currently has 12,500 troops on the ground, and they have seen very little from the UN. They thought that the UN would provide training to professionalize the South Sudan armed forces, to also professionalize like the police in South Sudan. But they say for the past years that the UN has been here, they have not seen anything being done to professionalize the army or the police. So they feel like there's no need of deploying more UN troops to South Sudan. And then also, there are those who think that the UN is undermining, they say the UN is undermining the sovereignty of South Sudan, because there have been cases of also disagreement between the government and the United Nations mission in South Sudan. This is not just the first time where they are disagreeing on the issue of this resolution. But in 2014, that is when the fighting broke out in 2013, immediately in 2014, there were a lot of disagreement. One was in central part of South Sudan, that is in Bor, where the Minister of Information was denied access to UN base. This did not go well with many South Sudanese. Another thing that happened in 2014 also is that as the fighting was going on, the there were some trucks of United Nations mission that were moving towards the northern part of South Sudan, and these trucks were cleared as carrying medicine. And later on, when they reached central part of South Sudan, they were found to be carrying actually arms or weapons that were supposed to be used. They say.
Right. Well, that was Patrick Oyed speaking to us on the line from Juba.